This is lecture 5 under literature 401, studies in fiction. This lecture is a continuation of our discussion on the theoretical approaches to fiction. Before now, we have studied formalism as an approach. We studied reader's response approach to the analysis of fiction. In the study of today, we want to look at structuralism. By the end of the presentation, you should be able to explain structuralism as a theoretical approach to studies in fiction. You are also supposed to be able to explain the key concepts that describe the theory. In this presentation, we are going to differentiate between structuralism and other approaches to studies in fiction. Therefore, it is expected of you to be able to differentiate between structuralism as a theory and other theories that can be used to analyze studies in fiction. Now, we want to look at structuralism as a theory, a theoretical approach. This is an approach that emerged in the mid-20th century and is primarily formed for analyzing data in the field of literary and cultural studies. So, what is the essence of structuralism? The essence of the theory is to explain underlying structures and systems that shape a work of fiction. Through structuralism, we look at the systems that are brought together, that are put together to create a structured work of fiction, a coherent work of fiction. So, as an analyst who is adopting structuralism, the idea is that meaning is not solely derived from individual elements of a text, but is a product of relationships and patterns that exist among different elements. So, to have a coherent whole, we need to have the idea, believe in the idea that that coherent whole is a combination of different elements that have been put together, is something that is generated from a number of systems that have been put together for us to have a meaningful whole, a complete work, a complete fiction, a complete text. So while we analyze using structuralism, we look at different elements that are brought together systematically to form a complete text, a complete narrative, a complete work of fiction. Now, let's look at the key concepts or principles of structuralism. What are the things we need to look at? In structuralism, we have binary oppositions in which there are two sides that are opposite to each other. Usually, in structuralists, we look at angles that are opposing to each other within a text. We have examples like good versus evil, male versus female, nature versus culture, and so on. Thus, an analyst who is adopting structuralism examines how these oppositions interact and create tensions that shape the narrative and themes of the text. So it looks at those elements that are opposite to each other and how they work together to form a complete text. Another concept we are looking at under structuralism is signifier and signified. As we mentioned in the previous principle, where we have binary features, we have signifier and signified as well under structuralism, where we have what is said and how what is said is represented in the real world. So there is a relationship between the linguistic elements and what they stand for in real life situations. So when a word is used, there is a particular concept that word is standing for or that word is representing in a real life situation. So the signifier is the sign. It may be the word, it may be a word, it may be a sentence, it may be a clause, it may be the entire text. These have to do with words that are put together, linguistic elements that are put together to form a whole. These linguistic elements have what they represent in the real sense of it, in the word of experience of the author. So there must be a relationship between the expression or the form or the text and the signifier, that is a particular concept in the society. What is the meaning of what is said? If somebody mentions table, table is a concept, table is a signifier. What will come to one's mind when the word table is mentioned is a particular object in the real world that has a flat surface joined by four legs. When the word dog is mentioned as a word, that is the signifier dog. But this signifier is being represented by an animal in the real world environment. That is a particular animal with four legs, domestic animal, other meanings that we can bring together when we hear the word dog. So in this case, dog, letters G, dog forming dog is a signifier. Why dog as a living being, domestic animal, is the signified. So the word used for the signified is the signifier. The word that's what the concept or something in the real world that the word is representing is the signified. Therefore, as a structuralist, our analysis is on how signs, words, sentences are used in literary works to convey meaning and create systems of representation. So whatever we say, we have an idea that we are trying to, that people believe in the real world experience. When something is mentioned, there is a thought that comes to the reader's mind based on his experience in, in the real world, in his environment. So there is a relationship between signifier and the signified. So this relationship must be established for meaning making, for interpretation. We also have structuralist narratology. One of the factors that need to be considered when we use structuralism as a theory for analyzing a text is the fact that under fiction, text is a narrative. And it's not just a narrative, it has a structure that it follows. It's a, an organized presentation. Narrative is not presented or written in a haphazard manner. If it is done like that, we will not have a complete text. So when we are studying a particular narrative work, the structure of it, the way it is organized, the way elements of narrative elements are put together must be considered. The analyst must look into elements like plots, which we have mentioned, characters or characterization, which we have mentioned, setting, point of view or narrative technique. All these, when they are put together, they will function within the larger system to create meaning and affect our understanding and experience as far as the story we are reading is concerned. If we cannot bring out the system of using plots, of using characters, of using setting, of using point of view or narrative technique, if we cannot bring them together systematically according to the way the author has used them, it will be difficult for us to understand the text that is presented before us for analysis. We also have universal structures and codes. Under structuralism, the belief is that there are some elements in text that are universal, that are shared among cultures across the world, across the globe. So we have different cultures, we have different histories, we have different times, we have different settings, but despite all of these differences, there are universal elements. There are elements in a text that are shared across the world, across the globe. There are patterns when it comes to writing a fiction that works across the globe will share. Therefore, while using structuralism for the purpose of analysis, the target is to identify the shared structures and codes that will help us to reveal the broader patterns and meanings embedded in literary works. We must look at those things that are common to literary works across the globe, whether the literary work is of Asia, whether it's Asian countries, whether it's of Asian countries, whether it's of European countries, whether it's from American countries, whether it's from Africa, anywhere the work might have come from, there are patterns that cut across works all over the world universally. So if those ones can be identified, like in every narrative, there will be characterization. How characters are represented is a different thing, but one thing that needs to be considered is that narratives, we have at least one character. Each of them, we have at least one character. There will be a setting for each text. There will be a time that story will refer to. There will be a place that story will refer to. So, despite the fact that the cultures that each of these texts will represent might not be the same with all the cultures some other texts will represent, or the history that some texts will represent may be different from the history some other texts will represent. We need to understand the fact that there are areas, aspects where these works will share some characteristics. So it is expected of the analyst who believes in using structuralism to identify those shared systems, those shared cultures, those universal elements, in order for him or her to reveal the broader patterns and to understand the concepts represented in the literary work better when such a work is studied as a single text. If such a work is studied not being connected to other in isolation. So the work is not supposed to be studied in isolation from other works across the globe or in some other areas. So we look at what somebody has done in relation to what some other people have done in the aspect of fiction. That will help the reader to have a broader interpretation, broader understanding of the text is analyzing, and this will come from previous experiences. What we have studied about some works from some other parts of the world before studying a particular text at a particular time. The last of the principles under uh, structuralism is contextual and cultural considerations. While formalism will say attention should be given to the text and what it contains, and the reader response will say attention should be given to the reader. Structuralism believes that a particular work may not be fully understood when it is studied from the internal structure perspective alone. The internal structure of the text mm, should be related to the external factors. Whatever happens in the text, structuralism believes that such must have had some influence from some external uh, elements. So this theory takes into account the cultural and historical context in which a work of fiction is produced and received. The culture of the people, that's why emphasis on the setting, the character, what make up the characters, who are the characters, what are their roles, what culture do they represent, what history do they represent. By looking at that, the analyst will have broader knowledge about the text, and that will give a better understanding and interpretation of the text. That's why structuralism recognizes that the meaning of the text is shaped by some cultural codes, conventions, and ideologies of the time and place in which it is situated. So, from what we have done now, we have looked at another um, theory for analyzing fiction, and that is structuralism. And we have looked at the various principles that make up structuralism. As usual, questions are following this presentation. Go through the questions, provide your answers. Where you are not sure of what answers you should give, you have the opportunity of going through the presentation again and then go back to the questions. You are expected to perform very well while answering the questions. Why you we in a situation where you cannot do as much as expected of you, you will be made to go through the presentation again. And that's what will make you to move to lecture 6, which will come after this presentation. Thank you for listening.